Pride is the opposite of who God is. Jesus said in Matthew chapter 11, "Take my yoke upon you and learn of me, for I am meek and lowly in heart, and you shall find rest unto your souls." Jesus, God in the flesh, was meek. If you aren't meek, then you aren't godly. God loves you, and He'll give more grace. But I tell you, if you want to accept that, you need to humble yourself. You need to be meek and lowly like Jesus. Jesus didn't promote Himself. You know, I think that one of the greatest moments in Jesus' ministry was when He had the people come and He fed the 5,000, and because of it, He went over the lake, and the next day they went around the lake. They found Him. It says that there was at least 5,000 men, and they wanted to come and by force make Him king. But He knew that the reason they were wanting to promote Him wasn't because they truly loved Him and were committed to Him. It was because they saw the food multiply. They saw Him as their cash cow. They saw Him as the way of just getting their own needs met. And so, because He knew that their heart wasn't right, He began to say some tough things to them. They said, "Show us another sign." Moses made manna come down out of heaven. He says, "Can you provide manna?" See, again, they weren't worshiping Him for who He was. It was for what He could do. It was all selfish and stuff. And so He says, "I am the manna that came down from heaven." That wasn't what they wanted. They wanted to see some physical manna. They didn't want Him to make a comparison and an allegory out of it. And so they began to criticize Him. And they said, "What are you talking about? How can we eat you?" And He says, "Unless you eat me, you have no life in you." And they thought He was talking about cannibalism. Did you know that most preachers today are so preaching for the approval of people, so that they can look good, so that people can talk about how awesome they are? They aren't preaching to honor the Lord, but they're preaching to get the pat on the back and the acclaim of people, or their money, or their support, or whatever it is. And most preachers, because of that, if people were to misunderstand what they were saying and somehow or another think that they were talking about cannibalism, most preachers would hurt themselves trying to backtrack and explain and say, "Oh no, that's not what I was saying. Please let me explain this." You know what Jesus did when they thought He was talking about physically eating His flesh and drinking His blood? Instead of apologizing, He made it worse. He said, "I'm telling you the truth. No man can, unless you eat my flesh and drink my blood, you do not have any life in you." He didn't apologize. He didn't backtrack. He was speaking the truth, and if they didn't receive it, fine. And did you know, because of that, it says right there in John chapter 6, I believe it is, that because of this, many left Him and went back and didn't follow Him anymore. They turned from a mob that was going to exalt Him and make Him king into a mob that rejected Him and left Him. And instead of Him, somehow or another crying and saying, "Oh, it's terrible, look at the people that left," He just turned around to His disciples, and in effect He says, "There's the door. If you aren't pleased, you can leave too." He did not defend Himself. He didn't promote Himself. He was dependent upon His Father. He said what His Father told Him to say. He made that statement many times. And because He had represented His Father correctly, He didn't care what the people thought. I think that was one of His greatest hours. I really believe that revealed that He was not a man-pleaser. He was not out to appease people. He was out to glorify His Father.